The intersection of endurance sport, health, fitness, and life. Challenging conventional ideas and empowering people with the science of self-propelled motion. This is the Endurance Experience Podcast, hosted by Tony Rich.
I wanted to be an athlete. I live in Boston. What else do you want to be but an athlete? But unfortunately for me, I had a challenge. Well, you can see it. Vertically challenged. I was vertically challenged, so as a result of that, I was always the last one cut when I went out for school sports, and I was always the last one picked when my friends would pick sides. Always. They picked Noah. They picked Ralph. They picked Fred. They picked Tom. They picked Sally. They picked Jane. They picked the girls over me. So that was devastating. That was devastating to me. What it taught me, though, it taught me about rejection. You know, all of us, there's three types of pain in our lives. We have physical pain, we have mental pain, and we have emotional pain. What's the worst of all three? Emotional pain. Can't train for that. Can't train for that. So how do you overcome it? It's not easy. So I didn't dream about being a race director. I dreamed about being an athlete. So what did I start to do? I started to run. Why? Because nobody can cut you from running. You just go run. So I've run about 150,000 miles since. I kid people and say, I used to be 6'5". This is what happened with all the running. I've run 155 marathons. I've done 9 IRONMAN triathlons. I've run it all over the place. Run all over the place. Set goals, not limits. I say, this is my motto in life. And this is what I think everyone should live their life by. This. It's my game, so it's my rules. It's your life. You can do whatever you want with it. Isn't that neat? Whatever you want to do, you can do. Don't let anyone else tell you you can't. Because you can. If you want to, you can. So that's what I've done. Live my life, my game, my rules. And the fact of the matter is, you can change the rules. You can change the rules. I wrote a book called The Last Pick. Last chapter in the book is called Changing the Rules. Changing the Rules. So then I heard about this thing, the Boston Marathon. I was 17 years old. Called my grandfather, who was the supporter of my athleticism, and I said, Grandpa, I'm going to go run that race in Boston. He goes, oh, they call it the Boston Marathon. I said, oh, well, that's a good name for it. Well, I'm going to go run it. So he says, okay, I'll meet you at Coolidge Corner. I said, great, where's that? He said, that's at the 24-mile point, not too far from here. And I said, great, Grandpa, I'm going to do it. So I took off. My brother drove me to the start, and I took off, and I'm running. Here's my grandfather waiting for me. I got to the hills in Newton, in Wellesley, that area there. Bam, down I go. Flat out. I got taken to the Newton Wellesley Hospital in a police cruiser. I got to the hospital, called my parents. I said, can you come pick me up? They said, where are you? I'm sitting in the Newton Wellesley Hospital. They said, what are you doing there? I said, never mind. Just come pick me up. So they picked me up, they drove me home, I called my grandfather, no answer, called him again, no answer. Finally, 9 o'clock at night, he answered the phone. I said, Grandpa, where have you been? He said, Dave, where have you been? I've been waiting for you all night. The old man goes by, the street sweepers go by, no Dave. I said, I know, I failed. He said, you what? I said, I quit. He said, no, you didn't quit. I said, I didn't. What'd I do? He said, you learned. I said, great. What'd I learn? He said, you learned that you cannot go along in life and set reckless goals. You had no business being in that race. I said, you're right. He said, you train for it next year. There's a novelty. You train, and I'll be there waiting for you again next year. I said, deal. 2 months later, my grandfather died. I said, I got to do this. I got to train. I was 18 years old. I said, I'm doing it. I'm fit. I'm ready to go. The day before that year's Boston Marathon, 1973, I got a stomach virus. My parents said, you can't run. I said, I have to run. The newspapers are saying, Dave running in memory of grandfather. And they said, you can't, you're too sick. And I said, can you give me something that very few other people have ever given me before? And they said, what's that? I said, a chance. How about a chance? That's all any of us need in life. It's a chance to do it. So they said, okay, fine. They drove me to the start. I took off. I got to 5 miles. Ugh, it was awful. It was awful. I was ready to bail. I kept on going. I saw my parents at the halfway point, and there's my mother. What's she doing? She's crying. Why? Because that's what mothers do. They cry. Why? Because they're worried about you. They're going through more pain than you'll ever go through. And there's my father. What's he doing? He's taking pictures of my mother crying, Cry over here. I was vindicated. Keep going, keep going. I got to the part where I dropped out the year before. I'm doing a survivor's shuffle over the hill, and finally I get to 21.5, and bam, I go down again. I go down again. I dropped out my second year in a row. Now I want to be an athlete. I get the last pick, the last one cut, drop out of my first Boston, drop out of my second Boston. Can you say loser? Because that's what's going through my mind. Here I am, sitting on the curb. Dropped out of my second Boston. I want to be an athlete in the city of Boston. Not happening. But a defining moment happened. A defining moment. All of a sudden, I turned around and I looked behind me. Where I dropped out was the Evergreen Cemetery. That's where they buried my grandfather. This is Tombstone, right behind me. That son of a gun said he'd be there. There he is. No, he's not there physically, right? He's there spiritually. He kept his end of the deal. I picked myself up and I said, I'm going to finish this thing. And I did. 4.5 hours later. 4.5 hours, I finished the Boston Marathon, my very first one. And I said, I'm going to run this race every year for the rest of my life in honor and tribute of the lesson that my grandfather taught me about earning the right to do these things. You can't just recklessly do it. So that's what I've done.
My guest on this podcast is Dave McGillivray, someone most of you are very familiar with. He is the race director of the Boston Marathon, and that was a clip from his TEDx talk, Defining Moments. He is also the author of several books, including The Last Pick, the Boston Marathon Race Director's Road to Success. We talk about the science of self-propelled motion on this podcast, and every once in a while we talk about amateur athletes who have done incredible things. And you can look back at some of the people that we've talked to. We had Becca Peasy on this podcast. That was episode 19. She was the World Marathon Challenge Guinness World Record holder. We had Chloe McCardle on the podcast. I believe that was episode 27. And she holds the Guinness World Record for the most English Channel crossings. That was a great podcast. Check that one out. And then episode 31 with ultra marathoner Michael Wardian, also Guinness World Record holder of the World Marathon Challenge and holds many other records in marathon and ultra marathon. So along those lines of amateur athletes that decided that they were just going to do amazing things, Dave McGillivray really pioneered this. He ran across the country from Medford, Massachusetts to Medford, Oregon. Incredible. He's done everything else. He completed the IRONMAN triathlon in Hawaii. He's completed the World Marathon Challenge, which, by the way, for those who don't know, is 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 consecutive days. Over 150 marathons total. And this year, he completed his 50th consecutive Boston Marathon. And look, there's people out there that don't understand the endurance enthusiasts and why we do what we do and why we make what we do such a priority in life and why we make such great sacrifices to do what we do. So once again, you will come away from this conversation with Dave McGillivray with a greater understanding of that, and hopefully in the process we will inspire some people to take action. So I talked with Dave about his book, The Last Pick, and the inspiration of that book. And we also talk about his 3 other books, the children's books that he has, and how he wanted to inspire people or kids with those books. We talk about his accomplishments running across the country, the IRONMAN, as well as the World Marathon Challenge, and of course the 50 consecutive Boston Marathons. I talked to him about which one did he think was most physically and mentally challenging. I asked him about his quote-unquote end game, which is a common question that I ask of amateur endurance athletes that have achieved bigger and bigger and bigger goals. What's the end game? You're going to continue to do this until your body can no longer do them? Or do you see an end game in sight? And so we have an interesting exchange around that. And finally, we talk about the Boston Marathon and some of his memorable moments and performances across his 50 Boston Marathons. And I asked Dave what he thinks the future holds for the Boston Marathon event, the most iconic marathon in the world. I may be biased. So, without further delay, I give you Dave McGillivray, race director of the Boston Marathon. All right, I am on with Dave McGillivray. Thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Tony.
All right. Many of the people on the podcast know you as the race director of the Boston Marathon, and that's only one part of your life. I think many people who know you well know that there's a deeper story here. And I just started your book, The Last Pick, very interesting book. And you also have three other books. And so there's many things I want to talk to you about. And I want to talk about your running history and your running accomplishments. And I also probably want to get into a couple of questions about your experience as Boston Marathon race director. But first, I want to talk about the book, The Last Pick, and what inspired the book, and how did you want the message of this book to inspire people?
Well, I think the whole purpose of writing the book is sort of to tell the story as to how I got where I got in life. For me, it started when I was a young boy growing up in my hometown of Medford, Mass, and, right in the Boston area, and Boston was synonymous with sports, baseball, basketball, football, hockey. And so as a young boy, I always wanted to be a professional athlete. And I worked really hard at that, very disciplined, very driven. But I was short in stature, so I was always the last one cut when I went out for team sports. And when I was sort of in the park leagues with friends, they would pick sides and I'd always be the last pick.
Right.
So for me, I learned a difficult lesson about the concept of like rejection and people not wanting you, not feeling needed. So that was hard to overcome. So I then decided to take another path, and that's why I started running, because you didn't have to be picked, and you can't get cut from running. You just go run. So my life went on mainly as a long distance runner, and I just then decided later on that I would tell that story mainly to give youth, aspiring youth, inspiration and motivation, and just the idea that there's always another path if you're determined enough and passionate enough to want to achieve a specific goal. When people say to me, "What's your book about?" I always say, well, it's about the person reading it, because I think throughout the book, there are a lot of stories. And I think as people read it, they may shake their head saying, yeah, that happened to me too. That happened to me too. Mm-hmm. People can identify with a lot of the things in the book in terms of, we're all in this thing together. I'm no better than anyone else. And we all have similar challenges. And it's just a matter of how you process them and how you overcome them that defines who you are as a person.
Yeah. So you stand 5'4".
Yeah.
And you
on
tell this
on a good day.
On a good day. And you tell the story in the book about being cut from the basketball team. This is a quote from the book. You say, though I hung in until the end, eventually I was the last one cut. In a misconstrued effort to help ease the inevitable, the coach said, Dave, if you were 5 inches taller, you'd be my starting guard. I think that tells the story because in team sports, oftentimes it largely depends on, physical stature. And if you're small in stature, maybe you're not going to be the center of the basketball team or the defensive lineman on the football team, but you might excel at something else. Mm-hmm. Endurance sports, especially running, but pretty much many endurance sports, they favor the gaunt person, the smaller body, the leaner body. Mm-hmm. And so you may not be a starter on a team, a sports team, but you might excel to the top 10% if you just decide to go where your attributes may be more favorable. So that's an interesting message.
No, and that's exactly it. That is the message. Interestingly, when the coach said, if you were 5 inches taller, you'd be my starting guard, I looked at him, he found it and just said, I thought it had to do with ability level, not how tall you were. So I challenged the center to one-on-one, 21 in front of the whole team. And he was 6'5" and I was 5'4", and I beat him. And it was a defining moment in my life because I basically said to myself as I walked off the court that I will never, ever allow anyone to tell me I'm not good enough or I don't belong. And I remember I went home that night and I put a sign over my bed and it said, please God, make me grow. And he must have been on vacation or something because he obviously didn't answer the prayer, at least in the way I initially meant it. But as I look back on my life in retrospect, I said, son of a gun, he did make me grow. He made me grow in so many other ways, morally and ethically and spiritually and intellectually and mentally. And he made me grow internally because that's really where it's all happening with all of us is who we are inside, not who we are physically. And again, that's why I started running.
And so you also have a couple of other books, children's books, right?
Yeah.
And those are sort of tied to your athletic achievements. And I'm going to put the link to those books in the show notes. Did you intend to try to get some books out there to inspire even younger kids?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I was doing a lot of motivational speaking appearances. In fact, I've done over 1,900 of them. And I was at an elementary school once speaking to the kids. And after it was over, a few days later, I got an email from one of the teachers who happened to be listening to the presentation. And she was very complimentary of the presentation and said, I've never seen the kids at a presentation like that so mesmerized and just quiet and paying attention and both, sort of inspired by it, but also laughing and just engaged. She said, have you ever thought of writing children's book? And I said, well, I've thought of it, but I just haven't made the move yet. She says, well, if you decide to, I'm an English major here in journalism, and I've written a few books, and I could help you with that. I said, let's sign you up right now. And so we just continued to meet and wrote our first book, Dream Big, because when I was little, but I had big dreams. That book is mainly about my first 2 attempts to run in the Boston Marathon and what happened there. So that book was very successful. And then we decided to write a second children's picture book called Running Across America, which is pretty explanatory about my run across the United States. And then the third one and last one was Finish Strong. And Finish Strong was chronicling my experience running 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 continents. So all these books have teaching moments, but also learning moments in terms of either the geography or just what I experienced while I was accomplishing these significant physical, kind of efforts. So they've been all successful. And the last part of the children's book story is I never wanted kids just to read the book and put it down and just forget about it. I wanted there to be a call to action.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can speak to kids and motivate them at the moment, but then when they leave, what's next? What have they got left to do? Like, how can they accomplish something? So I created something for them to accomplish, and it's called the Dream Big Marathon Challenge, where I'm challenging the kids to focus on 3 pillars of life. 1 is health and fitness, 2 is education and literacy, and 3 is giving back and philanthropy and acts of kindness. So I challenge them to run 26 miles, read 26 books, and do 26 acts of kindness. And then they'll get a medal that I'll send them. And so I've had thousands and thousands of kids all over America do that Dream Big Marathon Challenge. And that obviously just makes me is evidence that I might have made an impact on them.
What I'll do is put the link in the show notes. I think the more people that we can inspire, the better. The accomplishments that you have, I wanted to ask you about some of those, right? So this year you completed your 50th Boston Marathon. You've done IRONMAN, you've done World Marathon Challenge, as you said, 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. How did the running across the country come about? And I'm wondering if you can explain how you got the idea and what you did that for, the charity that you ran for.
Yeah. Well, again, having been denied being able to play on team sports and then deciding to run, I just decided to challenge myself. And when I was 12 years old, for example, I ran 12 miles on my 12th birthday, and then 13, and 14. And I'm 67 years old now, and I've been running my age on my birthday, for 55 years now. It's just something that I do. I like to challenge myself and just set a goal, work hard, earn the right, accomplish it, check it off the list, and move on to the next one. And I had heard about a friend of mine who biked across the United States from Medford, Mass to Medford, Oregon. Mm-hmm. And I just had this silly thought that if he can bike across, I can run across, which is a little silly because those are 2 very different physical challenges. But I just said, I'm going to do it. And I trained really hard and planned it all out. And I ran from Medford, Oregon to Medford, Mass, 3,452 miles in 80 consecutive days, averaging, for the most part, 45 to 50 miles a day. And I finished ceremonially in the Kingdom in Seattle. I started ceremonially in the Kingdom in Seattle, flew down to Medford, Oregon, and then ran to Medford, Mass, and finished ceremonially in Fenway Park in front of 32,000 people. And I did it for the benefit of the Jimmy Fund, which is the fundraising arm of the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And I just felt at the time that if I was going to make it all the way across this country, I better have a greater purpose for doing it than just my own physical challenge. So I went in and met with the kids who were being treated. And I knew at the time that the battle that I was about to fight by running over 5.5 million footsteps across America was in no way as difficult that these kids are fighting for their own life. Mm-hmm. And so I just, when it got tough out there in the desert or running over the Rockies or just wherever I was at the time, and I just thought about what those kids are going through. And it just kind of helped me get through each day and made the effort and the accomplishment much more meaningful.
As you prepared for it, how did you get through the training? I mean, were you self-coached? Did you do it all on your own? How did you prepare for it?
Well, there weren't any books out there that I was aware of that says how to run across the country, 10 easy lessons. No, I had to just figure it out on my own. I mean, I was young. I was in my early 20s, and I was relatively fit, and I had run a few marathons up until that point in time. And so I just, did double workouts every day, 10 miles in the morning, 10 in the afternoon, things like that. And then I did a trial run from my hometown to Albany, New York. It was about 400 miles and did it in 10 days by myself with a backpack. And after I had completed that, I said, well, if I can do a week's worth of this, maybe I can do a 3 months worth, Right. I'm not going to know until I try. And what's interesting about a concept like that, as long as you're intelligent about your approach, I mean, I was actually getting, as I was moving along and heading east, getting more fit along the way. Instead of breaking down, I was getting stronger because it was almost like I was training. Every day was training for the next day.
Right.
And it wasn't like I ran 40 or 50 miles nonstop. I would run 10-mile splits, like run 10, take a break, run 10, take a break. And that has a way of, making it more, less daunting. And so at the end of the day, I was fine and just rested for that night, woke up the next day and did it all over again. It's like going to a job, same kind of thing. So when I was done, people said, well, did you take a week off, a month off? I said, no, I ran every single day after I finished because that's what I do. I'm a runner, so why, unless I had to, why would I, no need to take any time off. And I basically haven't. So.
Yeah. Another quote from the book, you say, I learned about logistics, planning, discipline, and overcoming odds. I realized that doing something that seems impossible is a lot easier when you break it down into attainable pieces. It wasn't a run for 80 days. It was one day of running 80 days in a row.
There you go. That's it. And because it's almost like sometimes the first day of school, the teacher gives you the syllabus and you got to read 30 books,
right.
And you just start freaking out and say, wait a minute, you don't have to do it all by tomorrow. You just, piece it out, spread it out, chip away. And that's, for me, I had these goals to get through each day one at a time. And then when I, every time that happened, it was a point of immediate gratification, and you build off of that. And then one state at a time. So I went from Oregon to California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts. And every time I entered a new state, I got this burst of adrenaline saying, I'm actually doing this. So a lot of it is physical, some of it is mental, and a fair amount is emotional.
When we're coaching athletes, they want to get results quickly. And so I often will use the analogy of hiking, say Mount Washington, right? So you don't start and just bound to the summit. you go up a gradual slope. And then before you know it, after 4 hours, you're at the top.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Wow. So, and obviously you raised a ton of money for the Jimmy Fund. How much did you end up raising?
Well, in those days, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have cell phones, you didn't have anything. I had to just hand out a canister. Right. People would drop a dollar bill in it or something, but it was somewhere around 150,000. And in today's day, that could equate to a lot more money than what I was able to do, because it was just like, you're not going to get a lot of money running in the middle of the desert, but we did the best we could. Yeah.
So between that, so Hawaii Ironman, right, and then World Marathon Challenge, which one was the most daunting physically or mentally?
Well, they're all very different.
Yeah.
One of them was 80 days, one was 7, and one was 1. Intensity wise, I suppose the Ironman was more intense because it was truly a race, but at the same time, it was 3 different disciplines.
Right.
So very different: swimming, biking, and then add the running component. The tough part about the World Marathon Challenge wasn't as much for me anyways. Can't speak for others who did it, but was more wasn't the running, because that's what I did. It was everything in between, the rat race, getting from one continent to the next, and then trying to recover, in a seat, in a plane at 35,000 feet for 12-hour flights, things like that. Sleep deprivation was, staring me in the face. I couldn't sleep very much on the plane. So I said, well, I don't think that the running of 26.2 is going to get me as much as I'm going to crash and burn, because I'm just not getting enough sleep. But even though I wasn't, I still was able to get through it. But the run across America certainly, when it's all said and done, was the most challenging, only because of the duration. It lasted so long, 3 months. And then the conditions were all very different depending on where I was in America, whether it was 120 degrees in the desert or 14,000 feet in elevation running through the Rockies, or, some of these storms you run through in the middle of the prairies. So that event had its challenges that you can't really train for. You just got to deal with it as they come along.
Is an ultra marathon harder than Ironman? Is Ironman harder than 777? So you're one of the few people that have done all of them. So you can speak with firsthand experience. But I had a podcast with both Becca Peasy and also Michael Wardian, who have won the 777. So they have talked to me about the logistics of that. And not many human beings have made it to Antarctica, let alone run on Antarctica.
No kidding. Right. It's funny. Michael's out running across America right now.
Is he doing that? Okay.
Yeah. He's running from San Francisco to New Jersey. He emails me regularly, and we go back and forth. And I'm trying to give him some tips, from my previous experiences doing this. So he's averaging about 50 a day, and he's doing pretty well. Yeah, he's like 2 weeks into it now, I think.
I have to watch his progress.
Yeah.
And so, and then also you've done this year was your 50th Boston Marathon finish.
Yeah.
I was not born yet. I was born in 73.
Oh,
and you started running Boston marathons in 72. And here we are having a conversation about it all. What an amazing thing.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this about all the things that you've done that we've talked about. Have you thought about what is your quote unquote end game? So all of the endurance athletes, I asked this question that have come on this podcast. What's your end game? Because sometimes endurance athletes will talk about, how they reach for bigger and bigger goals. And then sometimes those end up either leading to some physical burnout or psychological burnout. And sometimes I've heard some people say, listen, I'm going to define when this ends and I'll figure out when that's going to be. And then some people say, this is something that I can never retire from. I'll do it so as long as my body allows. So my question to you is, with all the things that you've done and continue to do, what's your answer to that question? What's going to be your end game? And does your family factor into the decision?
Yeah. Well, I told you about my birthday run, and it was interesting when I was getting close to 50, I said, now, how am I going to continue doing this? At some point in time, it's going to be virtually impossible if I live that long to continue to do this. So I decided that I'd run 50 miles on my 50th birthday. And then when I turned 51, I'd start going backwards. So at 51, I'd run 49, and 52, 48. So I figured when I'm 70, I might be able to run 30 miles. And when I'm 80, I might be able to run 20 miles. So I can still keep that concept going. But I just reversed it. And when I turned 51, I was out running and I had run 49 miles. And there was the point where I had to make a very difficult decision in my life. Do I keep going or do I stop? Because I had been doing this for the better part of almost 40 years. And I stood in place out in front of my house for about a half hour, just agonizing over this. What do I do? What do I do? So then I just said, I have 2 more miles in me. I'm doing it. And I did, which basically made the decision for me that I was going to just keep doing this.
Yeah.
So people say to me all the time, well, what are you going to do when you turn 90? I said, well, first of all, I want to be breathing and then get out of bed. And I'll decide then, I guess. And then I said, I have a motto in my life. And my motto is, it's my game, so it's my rules. And in the very last chapter of my book, The Last Pick, the title of the chapter is Changing the Rules. So it's my life, my rules, my game. I can change the rules. So at least I have the comfort knowing that I don't have to continue to do this. And I can modify and adjust based on what's reasonable. And, I do think I have most of this in proper perspective. I only a few years ago, I was diagnosed with severe coronary artery disease, and I had open heart triple bypass surgery. And right before the surgery, I turned to my heart surgeon and I said, listen, there's this small race in Boston that I've shuffled through a few times, and it's in 6 months. If I go ahead with the surgery, what do you think? He gave me the best possible answer. He didn't say, no, I don't think you can do it or should do it, or yes, I think you can. He said, I'd be extremely disappointed if you couldn't. And it just made me realize, he gave me that 4-letter word, hope, that maybe I could actually go through this surgery, all this trauma, and still be able to recover and train and still get my 47th or 48th, whatever it was, Boston Marathon in. But I also knew that, my life's more important than a road race. So I said, it's a delicate balance and you got to be really careful. And you have a family, you have 5 kids, you have a wife, you have friends, and you can't just recklessly go out there and try to keep this streak going and risk your own life. So I get all of that. But at the same time, I didn't know until I tried. So I was just chipping away, being patient and recovering, but just getting out there, doing a mile walk and doing 2-mile walk and then a mile jog and a mile walk. And then and just progressively got myself to the point where I was able to get out there and run the Boston Marathon 6 months after surgery. So the point being is, what's my end game? Well, I enjoy doing this. And for me, I do it mainly for one specific, multiple reasons, health and fitness being one, but I do it mainly for, the whole idea is to feel good about myself. And that's when people say to me all the time, geez, what do you do for a living? And I used to mumble, I'm a race director. I go, what? I said, a race director. What do they do? Chalk mark in the road, Jelco. I said, what I do is I help raise the level of self-esteem and self-confidence of tens of thousands of people in America. I'm like, what? I said, no, that's what I do. People say, well, what's the toughest part about running a marathon? The toughest part? It's signing the application is the toughest part. Then make the commitment. Then you have to earn the right. Then you earn the right by doing the work. And then you toe the line, you answer the gun, you run the course, you cross the finish line, you get a medal, and you go home and magic happens. You feel good about yourself. And that's the foundation by which we accomplish everything in our lives. There's nothing more powerful in your life than to feel good about yourself. And that's how I feel about me. So going out there, I'm not looking for fame or fortune. I'm just doing things that make me feel good about myself.
Right.
And, it all stems from when I was the last pick. It all stems from when I felt like I wasn't needed, I wasn't wanted. And these kinds of things that I do on my own just elevate my own self-worth and self-esteem. And then I'm able to then do other things for other people and give back. And so my end game is, the most important person in the world is you. You have to take care of yourselves. That's not a selfish thing. That's unselfish. Because by taking care of ourselves, we eliminate the burden for other people to take care of us for us because we didn't do it. And secondly, we put ourselves in a position to help other people. And that's what I enjoy doing, because when you give, you receive even more in return. So in order to help others, in order to give, you first have to take care of yourself.
One of the things that just jumped out at me is someone of your ability and fitness having the heart issue.
Yeah.
And I think, wow, how can someone that fit have? That's probably another thing. I need to get a cardiologist on the podcast next to talk about that. But a lot of people, Alberto Salazar, and also Dick Hoyt. I said, wow, these are really fit people that have had bypasses. Well, I'll get a cardiologist to talk about that one of these days. The lesson
there for me is I learned at the age of 60 that just because you're fit doesn't mean you're healthy.
Right.
And, I always thought it did. And for me, a lot of it was genetics, but it was also self-inflicted too. Sometimes we kid ourselves into thinking that because we're fit, because we're endurance athletes, because we burn a lot of calories, maybe you can break a few little rules every now and then. Have a little of this and have a little of that. And then eventually it catches up with you.
Yeah, exactly. So. Well, one of the things about the running on your birthday, Joan Benoit, who wrote your foreword, she said in the foreword, I pictured Dave on his 100th birthday running his age, as has been his tradition for many years. And at mile 100, I will greet him with a memento inscribed as follows: "You are what you run." Thank you. So Joan Benoit wants you to do your 100-mile run on your 100th birthday. That would be something.
That would be something.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll ask you a couple more on a Boston Marathon. I could probably have a whole hour and a half, 2-hour conversation with you about some of the stuff that you've done. 50 years running the Boston Marathon, and what are some of the more memorable and outstanding moments in your mind, whether it be as a runner or as a race director?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. As I was approaching my 50th, I sat down and wrote out my 50 top memorable moments. I have a whole list, and I could have written 100 of them, right? Yeah. Because there's so many stories, both as a runner in the event, as well as a director of the event. As a runner, my very first one, I was 17, and I just jumped into the race and didn't really officially enter, and ended up dropping out at the hills in Newton and got taken to the Newton Wellesley Hospital in an ambulance. Long story short, I just vowed to come back the next year and and finish what I started. And I was able to get that one done. So those 2 years were obviously the ones probably the most memorable, only because it was how I got started. And when I finished in 73, I just said to myself on that day in April that I was going to run this race every year for the rest of my life. And, so far I have fulfilled that promise to myself. Certainly as a runner, running right after my open heart triple bypass surgery was probably the most meaningful Boston Marathon for me, given the situation I was in. The 2013 tragic year, right. I had gone back out to the start because I run after everyone now because I direct during the day and run it at night. And I was on the starting line and I got a phone call saying what happened at the finish. So I had to get back to the finish and help out there. So I actually didn't run the marathon that day, but a few days later, once we were able to get back, I ran it and finished it. So there's so many situations like that for me personally of memorable moments of running in the race. As far as directing, certainly my first year, 1988, the year before, there was some incidences at the start that they hired me to help fix. And it was a wheelchair accident and a rope tripping incident. And I had to come in and just make sure those things didn't happen again. And then the 100th running of Boston in 1996, we went from 9,000 runners in 95 to almost 40,000 in 96. So it was a big chunk of my responsibility to figure that all out. How are we going to get 40,000 people across a 39-foot starting line? But we did, and it went extremely well. So that was great. And then you have the weather years. 2007, there was a nor'easter. 2012, there was heat, like an inferno. And then 2018 and 19, weather again, rain, cold, wind, lightning, all those kinds of things. And then October, first time in October of 2021, that was interesting with how we had to reconfigure things, almost like starting all over again, with a rolling start and a smaller field. And then just this past April, coming back in 2022 to a normal size field. But the one that was the most epic was 2014, coming out of the bombing in 13 and just making that comeback. And I come up with my own mantra that the comeback is always stronger than the setback. And such was the case in 2014 with how the industry, the city of Boston, the country rallied. And we took back, our race. We took back Boylston Street. We took back the finish line. Meb Keflezighi wins, first American in a bunch of years. I mean, it was just epic.
That was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of memories, both running and running, helping to manage the race.
You got another book on your hands, if you can write it.
I am.
Okay. Nice.
I'm in the process of writing my book on my Boston Marathon experiences. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And then maybe even a movie one of these days. So will you end up getting the record for most Boston marathons? If I'm not mistaken, is it Johnny Kelly that has that?
Yeah. So there's you can look at it as being two records. One is the most amount, not necessarily consecutive. And that's Johnny. He's at 58, but they're not consecutive. A couple of years, he dropped out. So he started 61 and finished 58. And then there's a gentleman by the name of Ben Beach, who has 54 consecutively, but he did not do it this year. So his consecutive string is over. And then there's another gentleman, Mark Bauman. He's from the Chicago area, and he's got 52 or 53, I think. So he's number one as far as current consecutive active, and I'm number two. But again, Johnny's was cumulative. So I have 8 more to go to at least get to that number. Mm-hmm. But Ben could come back next year and continue to do it, or Mark could continue. So they could actually break Johnny's total record before me. And then if I wanted the record, I'd have to keep going. Who knows? I mean, it's hard to even fathom that many Boston Marathons and what age I will be at in order to actually get the record myself. I mean, I'm 67. So minimally, if no one breaks Johnny, to break Johnny's, I have to do it 9 more times. So that's 76. It's just hard to think.
It's hard, yeah.
76, I'm still running marathons. I mean, I hope so, but, well, I don't know.
Given your shape that you're in, I think that's maybe highly plausible. So we'll see.
Plausible. It's a good word.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So you've been very generous with your time. What do you think the future holds for the next 50 years of the Boston Marathon? For the participants, whether it be charity runners or qualifiers. It's getting harder and harder to qualify now.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to say what the future will bring. But, the race is the oldest continuous marathon in the world, most prestigious, the only one you have to qualify for. It just has all the characteristics that seem to, it will always be the holy grail of marathoning in the world. And it's almost like you haven't really run a marathon until you run Boston. Well, that's not true, but in the back of people's minds, I got to run Boston at least once. Right. It's a bucket list thing, whether it's I qualify or I run for a charity or get in some other way. I always say that I might be titled the race director, but I'm really, all I am is a caretaker. I mean, it was here way before I was born, and it'll be here way after I'm gone. And I'm just kind of taking care of it for a little while with a bunch of other people and pass it on to the next generation. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thanks for that. I think you're right. I think it's true that people see the Boston Marathon as the bucket list marathon. Yeah. And the major of the majors. And so I think you're right. Hopefully we'll continue to see. But it was, you've been very generous with your time. And this Boston kid that was born in Boston, been living in Boston my whole life and running the Boston Marathon, I'm glad I had a chance to sit down and talk with the legend. How can people find you out on social media? I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm old school, right? I mean, I know that's the way of the world. My kids know this stuff. They can run circles around me. All I do basically is post every now and then on Facebook, and my website has my email address. So just go onto the website, dmscsports.com, and you'll be able to find all the contact information. Yeah. I meant to ask you too, are your kids runners?
Yeah. Two of them are. I have 2 older boys and then 3 younger children. Ellie is a senior in high school. She's on the track team. In fact, she just took off to go to a track meet. And Luke, he's a sophomore. He's on the track team, and he's really, really, really good. He's one of the best sophomores in the state. So it's very enjoyable to sort of now go to these track meets or cross-country meets or road races and see your children participate and do so well. I'm not living vicariously through them, but I'm enjoying, sort of watching them and, have them also feel good about themselves for their achievements.
Yeah. All right. Well, look out for them. You heard it on the podcast. Watch out for the McGillivray boys and girls.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Dave, for coming on to the podcast.
Okay, take care.
Thanks again to Dave McGillivray, race director of the Boston Marathon. And the book is called The Last Pick. I did put the link in the show notes. It's a great book. And you may have heard an exclusive right here on the Endurance Experience podcast, a new book from Dave McGillivray. Memorable moments across 50 Boston marathons. I think he confirmed it. So we'll have to keep an eye out for it. I'm looking forward to it. Dave must have a great support system around him. As I said in previous podcasts when we had conversations with endurance enthusiasts who have done great things, there are many sacrifices that you have to make. And if there are people in your orbit, friends, family, acquaintances, they all have to understand and support you and your sacrifices. My hope is that someone listens to this podcast and hears Dave's story and is inspired to take action today, now. And someone maybe saying to themselves, hey, Tony, you're crazy. I'm not doing that endurance sports stuff. I define life in other ways. Okay, fine. That's fine too. And that's why you are you. And that's why I'm me. And people that are like me do the things that we do. Not everyone is going to run across the country. Not everyone is going to do a marathon in Antarctica. But I would just leave you with this. You only get one life. And if this is the only life we can be certain of, then at some point in time in your life, try to embark on something that causes a paradigm shift in your entire life. And that thing, whatever it is, moves you to take action, adapt and evolve, and never surrender. Do something that scares you a little bit. Do something that causes you to doubt whether or not you can do it. Do something that moves you. Something that causes you to cry and maybe even bleed a little. Something that completely forces you out of your entire framework. And you'll see what type of transformative experience that will have on your entire life and your future. Now let's finish up with some final inspiring words from Dave McGillivray's TED Talk. I'll see you guys again during the next episode.
Lessons learned is those who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. The worst injustice you could ever do is to underestimate your own ability. We've got to set goals, not limits. And no matter where in this country my car breaks down, I'll be able to run home. So lessons learned. So lastly, here's why I want to end this. We talked about defining moments. I want you to have a defining moment right now. Right now. And your defining moment should be a commitment to take care of yourself. The most important person in this room is you. You know, we all have something in common. I don't even know most of you. We all have something in common. You know what that is? We woke up this morning. Not everyone else did. And you had nothing to do with that. But what happens for the rest of the day is in your hands. It's up to you. It's up to you. You have to take care of yourself. It's not a selfish thing to do. It's unselfish. Why? Because you don't want to burden anyone else to have to take care of you for you, and you want to put yourself in a position where you can help someone else. It works. It works. Because when you give, you receive even more in return. And at the end of my life, I'd like to think I gave everything I had and then some until I simply run out of time, which I just have. Thank you very much for having me.
Follow Event Horizon Endurance Sport on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter for training programs and services. To become a member of our Endurance Institute or for a complete archive of podcasts, log on to our website, eventhorizon.tv.